everyone, it's Taylor here. Today we're going to be creating these 4 cards using our new Create in Quad Hearts stencil. The Create in Quads concept allows you to create 4 A2 layers using one large set of stencils. The stencils layer together to create the 4 different patterns. I'll also be using the Hearts Aplenty background. I'll just be using the clear set that comes with that Cling and Clear stamp set. I have the Love and Hug sentiment set with the coordinating dies to cut them out. I'll be using several colors of ink to do my blending. I have Guava, Poblano Pepper, Blue Raspberry, and Watermelon. And then I have the 4 blender brushes that will match those colors of ink. I'll be using Post-it removable labeling tape to create a hinge mechanism along the side of my stencils. I have my Just Press tool and I'll be embossing, so I have my powder tool, VersaMark, and white embossing powder. And I'll be doing some splattering using my eyedropper bottle and the Gonzai Tombi watercolors. You can see on the front of each of these large stencils is the Tailored Expressions company name in the bottom left, and then in the right you have the item number. You can also see there are etched alignment guides and alignment squares to allow you to easily line up the layers and create the layered look for each of those A2 card panels. I'll be using one of our Create in Quad paper packs. This is the Sugar Cube, and it's sized at 8 by 10.5, which is the perfect size so that you only need to make 2 cuts when you go to cut your 4 bases apart. You want to find stencil number 1. It has a -1 after the item number. I'm going to take that removable labeling tape and tape it down along the left side and then fill in the boxes on my placemat. So I'm just using a fine tip Sharpie marker to fill those in so that you can see when you replace your second stencil, you will line it up with that same Post-it labeling tape and make sure that all of those squares are aligned with the next stencil layer. So I'm starting with Guava ink and laying that down. I'm using a bit of a lighter hand with the Guava. Sometimes Guava and the other red that I'm using, Watermelon, can be a little similar if you have a heavy hand. So I would just encourage you, if you're going to use this color combo, to be a little bit lighter with the Guava to get that nice pinky coral color. So now I have stencil layer number 2, and I am using Blue Raspberry ink for the second stencil layer. I want to make sure that my item number is in the exact same spot at the bottom right hand corner, that I have -2. Now I'm moving on to item number -3 and lining up the alignment squares and also using my piece of Post-it tape as my hinge so that I can lift up on my stencil and place it back down, sort of like turning the page of a book. I used Watermelon on this 3rd layer and gave it a bit of a heavy hand so it had a little bit more contrast to that Guava. And then we'll go in with the 4th layer and finish off the pattern. So as you're layering these, one of the things to pay attention to is also how the pattern looks. So obviously as you move on, you can see how the pattern is coming together. And if you need to shift it ever so slightly just to get it in exactly the right spot, then feel like you can do that. So those squares are there to help you with alignment, and most of the time should be spot on, but you can also use your own judgment and make a shift if you need to. So here I am cutting that 8 by 10.5 piece apart. I started by cutting it at 4 inches, and then I turned and cut at 5 1/4. So I ended up with 4 A2 layer panels, each measuring 4 by 5 1/4. Now I'm setting up in my MISTI. I have my black foam piece because I'm going to be using clear stamps, so that's underneath my grid paper. And I'm using the stamps from the Hearts Aplenty Cling and Clear set to add a little bit of detail over the top of my stenciled blended hearts. So I'm going to be using white embossing powder for all of these hearts. I thought it would stand out and give a nice contrast to the colored hearts, but also match the background color of the paper that I used. So I'm putting down the powder tool and then stamping in VersaMark and covering with the white embossing powder. I have a paintbrush that I've been using to brush off any of the excess powder that sticks to those blended hearts, and then I'm going to use my heat tool to emboss the XOXO pattern over the larger hearts. I have here my Milky Pop gel pen. I love this gel pen. It gives really bright white details, and I just added a few little dots inside those smallest hearts. I wanted to see just how detailed I could get with this very first one, and then I simplified a little bit as I went on. So here I'm laying down again the powder tool. This is just a solid heart that fits perfectly inside the smaller heart, again covering with that white embossing powder and brushing it back off into my container. I will say that I probably would do this differently if I did it again, because I did end up with quite a bit of embossing powder residue in my MISTI and had to kind of brush it out. So I need to get out my anti-static powder funnel tool and use that next time instead of doing my powdering over the top of my MISTI base. Now I'm continuing on with the second A2 card panel. I have used my powder tool to condition and my paintbrush to brush off any excess residue of powder, and then I'm heat embossing the outline of hearts in that largest heart at the bottom. Now you'll see I've grabbed a piece of Post-it labeling tape to mask off the right side of the heart at the bottom. I only want that heart to stamp on the portion of the heart that's actually blended on my cardstock. So by masking off that tiny bit of white around the outside of the card, I have a half heart on each side so that my pattern matches and looks pretty seamless there at the bottom. So I'm going to continue adding patterns to the smaller hearts at the top of this panel. And one of the things I wanted to show is that you can also do this with an acrylic block. You don't have to spend the time setting the stamp up in your MISTI and shifting it each time you need to stamp within a new heart. So I'm powdering those 3 smaller hearts, and then I'm going to take the acrylic block and just stamp the solid heart inside each of those 3 hearts at the bottom. It was much faster to do it this way, and I know a lot of us are very comfortable with our MISTI and we feel like it allows us to make a mistake, because if you do, you can always just close that lid again. But if you want to use an acrylic block, it worked really well for me to do that. So I'm going with panel number 3 here, and I'm using the striped heart inside the medium-sized heart. So there are 2 of them. I'll do the one on the left first and then flip that card panel around to do the one on the other side. If I feel like I can be pretty quick with my stamping, then I haven't been heating in between. So sometimes I heat each element on its own separately, and sometimes I will do 2 stamps and then heat both of them at the same time. So it kind of is your personal preference. You just don't want to wait too long in between, because that VersaMark can dry, and then when you go to emboss, it will just blow all of your embossing powder off of your paper. So kind of know yourself and your speed if you want to do each one individually, or heat in between each one individually, or do a few at a time. So here I am back with the acrylic block again, and I did those solid hearts inside 4 of the hearts, and then I'm going to do some words. So there are some words in this little clear set to make these into little conversation hearts. I think they say things like hugs, be mine, XOXO. I set up 5 different ones on 5 different hearts and then powdered the entire background. And I think I see a crazy for you and a be mine, I heart you, cutie pie. So there's lots of options in there to add some cute words as well. So now that that's finished, I'm going to do the sentiments. I have watermelon cardstock, and I'm conditioning that with my powder tool. We're going to emboss these again with the white embossing powder. I love a crisp white sentiment over red cardstock. So I've grabbed 4 of the sentiments. I'll be using a different one for each project. I have love you, hugs, happy Valentine's Day, and sending love. It looks like those are the 4 that I chose. So now I am stamping with the VersaMark and using my Just Press tool to press that down, and then pouring the embossing powder over the top and back into my jar, and then we'll heat that beautiful white embossing powder over the red cardstock. It looks so bright and crisp. I just love this look. So really don't be scared of embossing on colored cardstock. It really gives a pop to your project, especially when you've used white cardstock for your background. Now we're going to take those coordinating dies, tape those down, and send it through the die cut machine to cut those out. Once those are trimmed, we can pop them out of the die and they are ready to adhere to the card base. I have my 4 panels here and I'll just decide which sentiments I'm going to be using on each one. I have a vellum heart that I cut out of our heart stacklets for that one with the sending love. So I'm going to adhere sending love to the vellum, and then we'll use foam tape, hiding the foam tape behind the sentiment so that you can't see those foam tape pieces, and then adhering that down inside the large heart. So I was really pleased to find that several of the hearts we have in our collection perfectly match with the hearts in the quad stencil. So you know that I already used the clear stamps from Hearts Aplenty, and then the heart stacklets work really great as well. That's another coordinating one if you have that in your collection or want to add it, that will go perfectly with these cards. So we have Happy Valentine's Day for the one with the large opening in the middle, and then Love You I'm going to position at the bottom right of the panel that has the left side panel or left side pattern. And then we're going to put Hugs over the largest heart in the center of the all over pattern. I did pop those up with a little bit of foam tape to add some dimension to the card panels, and then I decided with one final step I was going to add a little bit of splatter to each of the card panels. I grabbed my Gonzai Tombi watercolors. I love the blue gold with this color combination, so I added 3 or 4 drops of water directly onto the cake of watercolor, and then used my paintbrush to mix it up and tapped with my finger to get that splatter across each of my card panels. Now don't be afraid of the splatter. I was talking with my friend Heather as I was doing this, and she said, splatter always looks better when you come back to it. So I felt that way with this card as well. I put it on there and then I was like, oh no, do I love it? And then I came back a little while later and I loved it. So it dries with a really bright, vibrant color, and I love how the gold and the toffee card bases go together. So I'm going to be adhering each of these to the card base. Now this video is not in real time, so please know that I did wait a while for these to dry before I adhered them to the card bases. Don't ruin your pretty panels by smearing your splatter. So these are the 4 cards that I ended up with using that Creating Quad Heart stencil. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and you can find all of these products at the Tailored Expressions web store at tailoredexpressions.com.